All right, welcome back to another episode of 2X, where I help you scale your business twice as fast with specific relevant advice. Today's topic, let's talk a bit about mentors and advisors. First off, let's kind of understand what the distinction between a mentor and an advisor is. Generally, the easiest way to think of it is a mentor is someone who is genuinely supporting you on a more holistic level, not just specifically for the business. You probably aren't compensating this mentor as well. So they're not just for the business. The mentor usually cares more about you as an individual and is out to help you grow both personally as a leader, but also through your career or through your business as well. An advisor, on the other hand, is typically more specific, someone who is brought in for a specific task around the business. They could be an advisor that is brought in to, let's say, help you with understanding how to do fundraising to hit your fundraising goal. Maybe it's an advisor to help you with launching a new product in a new market. So usually advisors are brought in on very specific goals or very specific topics. It could be like a marketing advisor. Maybe it's a someone who can help you with the tech and hiring a CTO. So depending on what you're looking for, you usually bring in those kind of advisors. Advisors in a business are usually also compensated in some form. Compensation can come in the form of monetary compensation. It could be stock options, or maybe it's just in-kind compensation where they get discounts or some sort of benefit for shopping with your business. So there are many ways to engage a mentor or advisor. To take a step back to kind of understand why we might want to find a mentor or advisor, it seems very obvious. Like we think that obviously it's number one is their knowledge is one thing that you care about, but not only their knowledge. Having a mentor or advisor is beneficial in a few other ways that you might not have thought about. So one way might be having just someone else to bounce ideas off. So not necessarily purely their technical expertise, but just getting a different vantage point, because they may be able to see things that you don't see, or they may know what your blind spots are that you aren't even aware of, right? Another reason why you may want to look into getting a good mentor advisor is because they can also lend and add to that brand value or credibility. So if you have, let's say, someone who is reputable in your space, willing to back up you or your business, it helps. You can go to an investor and say, "Oh, I have XYZ as my as my advisor, and this person is very well known in the industry because they've successfully done X, Y, and Z, or maybe they're a well-known influencer. Who knows?" But it helps add to that brand value as well. And lastly, just having that someone else that you report to helps give you another layer of accountability. Because as we all know, as founders, we are our own boss, and that is a double-edged sword. Sometimes what we really struggle with is we may benefit from having that kind of kick in the ass to get something done, and we don't have that as founders. So if you have a mentor advisor, you feel like you're reporting to someone, if not your investor, at least your mentor advisor is the one who can hold you accountable to what you say you will do, because you're going to meet with them on a more regular basis, right? So now that you kind of know why you might want a mentor or advisor, how do we go about approaching it? The common problem that I often see with a lot of entrepreneurs, or not even entrepreneurs, even career seekers as well, if they go out and look for a mentor, is they don't really know how to start. And they tend to over-formalize the process. First thing to know is a mentor or advisor doesn't necessarily have to be a formal relationship. More so with mentors, less so with advisors. So sometimes you could end up in a situation where you deem someone as your mentor, but he or she doesn't even know that they're actively mentoring you, right? That's absolutely okay. And then on the advisor side of things, it's usually a bit more formal. So typically you have some form of an agreement in place, but I'll get to that in a second. So first off, as you consider going out looking for a mentor advisor, my first recommendations is there's a 5-step process that I'll walk you through that will probably help you get to understanding who you can work with and how to get in front of them. So step number 1 is you need to know, number 1, what are you trying to get out of this relationship? What are you trying to learn? Be as specific as you can. So maybe it might be, oh, I want to learn how to start a marketplace business, or maybe I want to learn how to raise my first round of capital, or I want to learn how to grow my employees from 50 to 200, whatever it is. Understand what you're trying to learn first. Because once you know what you are trying to learn, you can then start step 2, which is you can identify who is the best person who can teach you what you are trying to learn, right? So I'd say when you're thinking about who to identify, don't be afraid to aim high here. Oftentimes, what I find a lot of people kind of holding themselves back on is they think, oh, this person is a busy CEO of this company, or like, I idolize Elon Musk and I want him to be my mentor, but why would he ever bother mentoring me, right? Or being an advisor for me? I'd say don't be afraid to aim high for these really reputable people, and I'll walk you through how exactly you can get in front of them if you are really persistent and if you really care about and value their input and feedback. So identify who's the best person. Now that you know who is the best person, this is kind of step 2A, I would say, is you want to understand how this person is connected to you. So you want to, probably the easiest way is you go on LinkedIn, you look at, who are they connected through? So what is your second degree connection, third degree connections? Does someone is that person connected with this person you're trying to pursue? Because if you are, you can get that warm introduction. And that will go a lot further than just, cold outreach, trying to jump on the gun and get the person to be a mentor just out of the blue, right? So think about, how do I know this person? How am I connected to this person? And all said and done, it's not the end of the world if you don't know anyone who knows this person. So I'll get into that in a second. So third step now is, now that you know who you want to go after, maybe you've identified a few potential connections that can give you that warm introduction. Or if not, then even if you have, you're moving into step 3. And step 3 is, I would say, you want to identify where this person hangs out. Or in other words, you want to stalk them, right? That's kind of the awkward term to put to it. So when I say stalk, you're not trying to become like a stalker in the negative sense. It's more about, you want to understand, where does this person typically engage with people? And when I say engage with people, it's not just physically in person, but it could be virtually as well. Do they go to certain events? Are they active on certain platforms? Are they vocal about certain issues? So you want to understand, where will they be willing to engage in some form of conversation with the public? And because there is your opportunity to kind of get in front of them, which we'll jump to in step 4 in a second. But the idea is, think, where do they hang out? Maybe like Elon Musk is very active on Twitter. He's really vocal about some topics. That might be a starting point. Or maybe if it's not Twitter, maybe this other mentor is always going to certain type of investor pitching events. Then maybe that's where you want to go and hang out. Try to figure out, where are they going, both socially, but also from a business networking perspective. Most highly involved and highly proficient mentors or advisors, if they're high profile, they will typically be out doing some form of networking, be it through social media or be it in person. So moving on to step 4, now that you know where the person that you're going after is kind of quote unquote hanging out, you want to start to get on their radar. So you want to start to get noticed. So the starting point is, you don't have to jump the gun and go right to them right away, but you want to attend or be present in those conversations, and they will start to notice you if you're frequently in those places, if you're frequently being vocal as well. So get on their radar, be where they are, ease your way into their periphery, right? So maybe you might attend those events that this person is speaking at. Maybe if they are a guest speaker, you might ask them questions. Maybe you might volunteer, right? And you might try to speak to them at some point. Or maybe you're trying to reach out to their mentees, talking to their mentees and starting to get to know them before you even get to know the mentor or advisor that you're pursuing. So start to get on their radar. And then once you have that, then you can start to eventually build that relationship with this person. After approaching the people around them, after making them a bit more aware of your presence, obviously not in a bad way. Don't do things just for the sake of attention, but you want to do things that they view positively, right? So for example, if you know that this investor that you want to get to be your advisor, if you know that this person is really against certain types of questions, obviously don't ask the question. But if you know that they like certain types of smart questions, then ask those kind of questions more often, right? So start to kind of get them to pay attention to you in a good way. And then the next step then is to start to build the relationship with them. To give you a rough sense of building the quote-unquote relationship, this whole process from identifying who you want to go after, figuring out where they are active on and starting to get on their radar, and then eventually even building a relationship with them. For a mentor, maybe it's a longer process. It could be something that takes you anywhere from 6 months to a year, maybe even longer, depending on who you're going after. But I guarantee you, if you stick to the process, you will be able to see some results. And I'll give you a lot of examples in a second. For an advisor, obviously for a business, because you have very specific timelines, goals, and you're also making it a more of a formal relationship, and you're also compensating the advisor typically, it is okay to speed up the process a bit more. And usually I see this happen within 3 months. So on the relationship building side of things, the main premise is people will give you good advice if they like you, right? If they really care about you. So you want to make them care about you in some sense, in some level. You want to help them understand why you are the person that they want to look after, give good advice. Is it you as an individual that they really like, or is it that you're pursuing some sort of mission or purpose that they personally feel passionate about? If that's the case, then they're more likely to gravitate towards you, right? So start to build a relationship with them. And then once you feel comfortable, once they feel comfortable, it's much easier to kind of jump into that quote unquote formal mentor or advisor relationship. But like I said before, a mentor relationship does not necessarily have to be does not necessarily have to be formal. You don't necessarily have to go up to the potential mentor and say, will you be my mentor? Sometimes that conversation is never brought up. And then on the advisor side of things, usually it is a bit more formal. You'll have some form of an agreement. You might say, hey, I'd love to have you as an advisor for my company. Here's what I'm looking for. Here's the compensation. And here are kind of the objectives and how we will meet and how I will get advice from you. So yeah, that's kind of the rough 5 steps. I'll kind of repeat that, but repeat that again to you. So step number 1, know what you want to learn. Step number 2, who is the best one for it. Step number 3, identify where this person hangs out. Step number 4, start to get on their radar, start to get noticed. And then lastly, build the relationship with them before you jump into getting them to engage with you. So those are the 5 steps. Now, how do you make the most out of this mentor-mentee relationship before I get into some examples? So obviously, I would say the number 1 thing is you need to know how you want to learn, and you need to know what questions you have. Because the biggest problem a lot of mentors will complain about is that they have people who just say, hey, will you be my mentor? And not everyone knows how to be a good mentor. Even if someone is an experienced mentor, you should drive the conversation because you know what you need best. They may know your blind spots. They can help point you in and make you aware about things that you haven't considered, but they don't know what your objectives are. So you need to come to those meetings, or you need to be the one who's raising the right questions. So never just show up for a meeting and just expect your mentor to mentor you, right? Moving forward, I'll generally use the word mentor in this conversation, but it applies to advisors as well. So you need to know what questions you want to ask. So for example, you might show up to a meeting and say like, hey, I'm having this problem with a vendor. This vendor does not want to work with me because of X, Y, and Z. What do you think about that? So you're giving specific context so that people are able to give you very specific feedback as well. You don't just want to say like, hey, tell me about how to find mentors. It might be too broad or too general, right? They can give you general advice, but if you can be more specific to your situation, then it is going to be more beneficial for you, and it's going to be easier for your mentor or advisor to really give you the right kind of advice as well. So know what questions to ask. Come prepared for your meetings. Make sure you have a clear agenda. If you have no relevant questions, then don't be afraid to say, hey, I have nothing to talk about. Can we reschedule a meeting to next date, whatever it is. It's okay to do that. And if you have, personal issues, feel free to bring those to the table as well, because every smart mentor or advisor will know that a business is not in isolation. your personal, let's say, limiting beliefs, your personal relationship issues, those will all impact your business as well. So you want to try to be as transparent as possible and just be as authentic as possible when you're sharing with them. So yeah, kind of keep those things in mind. Know what questions to ask, be transparent. Other tips that will help you with engaging your mentor or advisor in a very effective manner is number one, don't ask the same question over and over again. So, if you've asked someone the same question again, what it's actually signaling to them is that they've given you the answer to the question and you have either not taken action, which is why you're bringing up the same problem again, or you don't value their input or you don't believe in what they're talking about. So either way, it's sending the wrong signal to them. So never try not to ask the same question over and over again. If you say something, be diligent on updating them on the deliverables. What was your action item? Did you do it? If you didn't do it, why didn't you do it? Those kind of things. So just keep them in the loop in terms of what's happening. On the note of keeping them in the loop, a good practice that I would recommend is to send out a monthly or even quarterly kind of newsletter or call or set up those meetings, right? So if you can't set up the meetings as frequently, then one really simple way is just sending out like a newsletter to all of your mentors or advisors. And this newsletter, it really depends on where you're at. It could be as frequently as once a week, or maybe normally I would send mine once a month. And some people maybe even send them quarterly. So it depends on you. But in this newsletter, if you're kind of scratching for what could be the format, I would say a rough template that you can use is number one is, what are the updates? What's the main things that are happening with either your business, with your product, or with you? These updates can be further categorized under, let's say, sales-specific updates, product-specific updates, marketing-specific updates, or maybe it's updates around your team, so hiring, talent, those kind of things. So those are some categories. If you're raising capital, then you can include a category under fundraising as well, capital raising. So yep, that's the starting the first category. So updates. Then second category is I recommend having some sort of gratuity or acknowledgement portion in your newsletter where you be thankful or acknowledge the mentors or advisors who have helped you, or the people who have helped you or supported you in your network. That just really, number one, it kind of shows that you are appreciative of their support. Number two, it also engages them as well. So the people will vie and compete to kind of be recognized by you because they want to know that you see them as someone who's valuable. And that also sends a signal to all of the rest of the mentors and advisors in your network as well, because they know like, oh, hey, I know this other person, he's mentoring my mentee as well. And hey, it's good to see that this person's giving this person good advice, right? So yeah, just think about those kind of things. And lastly, so in that advisory newsletter, so I mentioned updates. I talked a bit about gratuity and acknowledgement. I typically like to wrap up these newsletters with kind of the call to action or the ask. So the ask could be in the form of like, hey, I'm looking to find a CTO. Do you know anyone who could be a good fit? Or I love someone who can advise me on how to interview and screen for the right CTO candidate, right? So have a specific ask. The more specific, the better. The easier it is the easier it is for someone to think about either who to recommend or to give specific advice to it. So don't just say like, hey, I'd love to learn about sales. That could be too broad. So try to be as specific as possible. So yeah, those are some tips around the mentor or advisor newsletter. So I want to talk a bit about some examples in terms of finding those mentors, those advisors, kind of engaging them, just so you can see it in a real life context and situation. So the first example I'll give is actually my personal example. When I got into the startup scene back in 2014, my main goal there was I had come out of my second corporate job. I had previously failed a startup, and I was actually very passionate to eventually move into a situation where I could help other people learn my mistakes and avoid my business building mistakes that I made in my first company. So I thought, hey, what's a great way to do this? I thought that the idea of running or starting an incubator accelerator would be great. But I realized that obviously me, myself, as someone who has no consulting experience, barely any business experience, only having that one failure, no one's going to be willing to listen to me or take my advice. So where should I start? I said, okay, if I want to learn about building an incubator accelerator, probably the best place to start is to start by working for one, or at least volunteering for an incubator accelerator. So I said, okay, what are the incubator accelerators in Vancouver? I went out, I started to identify the different organizations, and I kind of narrowed it down to both Launch Academy at the time, which was more tech focused, and there was Spring Activator, which was more focused on social ventures. And through involving myself in a bunch of their events, volunteering, I got to know kind of both the main people at those organizations. There was Hussein Halak at Launch Academy, and there was Keith Ipple at Spring. And I said, okay, I resonated a bit more with Keith's philosophy, his approach to using business as a force of good and not just purely profit, right? So I said, I wanted to make Keith my mentor. So if you notice there, I completed step one. I identified what I wanted to learn. And then number two, I identified who I wanted to learn from. So now that I knew I wanted Keith to be my mentor, and I was actually very cognizant and deliberate about this process as well, because to give you some sense, I had actually moved into this very deliberately because I had a accountability buddy that I was working with. So I'll share his story in a second. So at the time, at the start of I think it was summer in 2014, we had both said, hey, let's go out and find mentors for ourselves. And we will use this process and we'll update each other on how we are progressing with our pursuit of finding a mentor or advisor. So I said, okay, I want Keith to be my mentor. How do I get Keith to start to notice me? So I started to attend a lot of Spring's workshops. I even started to volunteer for the events as well. I started to know all of the employees at Spring. So I got to know Ilya, who used to work at Spring. Nikki also used to work at Spring. And eventually, I even participated in one of Spring's programs. So I actually joined the incubation program, paid for it, went through the program, and actually learned a lot. So coming out of it, I actually felt that now I was clearly and readily on Keith's radar. He knew who I was. The employees at Spring knew me and were talking about me, and Keith was familiar with my name. So I myself made the mistake of making it formal, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a mistake, but I said to Keith, hey, Keith, I really value your input. Will you be my mentor? And Keith, being someone who is not exactly familiar with, not to say not familiar, but it's more about he doesn't formally take people on as mentors or mentees. For him, he fired it back to me. He was like, I don't really know how to mentor. You have to tell me what you want to learn, and then I'll be able to give you the right advice based on that. So through that, I actually realized that, hey, probably the best way for me to learn from Keith is to actually just work for him. So then I offered to volunteer to start out on commission through Spring. So with no pay, I would help them with filling up their programs, finding the right entrepreneurs for it, and then I would take a small commission for placing entrepreneurs into your programs. And then the next step from there then is eventually, because they liked the work that I did, and I was enthusiastic about their company, their mission, they ended up hiring me. So I was working for and with Spring and Keith for the last 7 years, pretty much from 2014 to about 2020. So 6 years there, sorry. And yeah, that's kind of my journey in terms of finding a mentor and actually learning from the mentor. So in my case, the best way for me to learn was just to really be under his wing and see everything that he was doing and be able to ask him questions at any time. So that was my example. I mentioned I had an accountability buddy. So his name is Steven. And Steven, at the time, he was more profit and more business oriented, less so about the social venture and enterprise kind of thing. And Steven, he saw this guy named Dan Locke here in Vancouver as his potential mentor. So he said, hey, Dan is very prolific in running a lot of events. He's very well known in the community for the kind of advice that he provides and his approach to sales and marketing. So how would he actually approach Dan and actually get on his radar? So Dan, I believe at the time, had some sort of formal mentee program that he was running as well. But even then, he was quite selective with who he brings on board as a mentee. It's not just as long as you can pay me, you can be in my inner circle kind of thing. So for Steven's example, it was actually kind of funny. Steven would attend all of the events that Dan would speak at. Obviously, he would ask smart questions, get noticed, and then he actually started to approach and get to know many of Dan Locke's mentees before he actually went to actually approach Dan Locke himself. And what was actually funny is before meeting Dan, he even got to know Dan's wife as well. So when he was formally introduced to Dan, Dan actually said, "Oh yeah, I've been hearing a lot about you. Even my wife's been talking about you," right? So it's the same kind of approach. You want to know what you want to learn, identify who you think is the best for it, and then start to look at where they're hanging out, get noticed, get on their radar, and then build a relationship with them before you actually start to formally engage. So Steven actually, same as me, he ended up working with Dan, I think, over a couple of years before he left and started his own copywriting agency. And now he's actually moved away from copywriting into NFTs. But the main point is that process, that approach, it works. So definitely try and implement it if you are out there looking for a mentor advisor. And another example that I recall from my engagement with Spring was not so much for a mentor advisor, but there was an entrepreneur that worked with Spring who was looking for an investor. And he applied kind of the same approach, whether or not he knew of it. So he knew that, hey, there was this investor that was really vocal and active about politics in the US. And he himself was also very well informed about certain areas of these politics, and he also had very strong opinions on certain things. So he started to engage with this investor through Twitter. He would respond to the investors' tweets, debate with them, and then eventually it actually got to the point where the investor said, "Hey, if you're ever in town, I'm happy to debate this topic with you over a couple of beers." So obviously, the entrepreneur said, "Okay, I'm going to be in town next week," and even though he wasn't originally planning to, he bought the plane ticket, went down there, and actually met up with the investor and actually started to just build that relationship. And the investor did end up investing in their company. So just think about how can you slowly build, not necessarily slowly, but how can you through stages get in front of this person that you are trying to get in front of. So it's very intentional. Yes, serendipity does exist, and sometimes you meet that natural mentor advisor out of the blue. But if you can be purposeful with how you approach it, you can be a lot more effective with finding or generating your own luck and getting the right people to give you good advice, right? So lastly, to wrap it up, I'll just lightly touch on some differences around an advisor versus a mentor. So if you're not familiar with business governance and how it usually works, there's this thing called board of directors, and there's also advisors. So a board of director is a more formal term for people who are involved in the business. I would say that they're a lot more involved than a regular advisor. Board of director is someone who's actually liable to certain things in the business as well. So you typically tend to put together a board of directors when you move into, let's say, a Series A round of fundraising. So you're at a certain stage of growth. You can still be a private company for sure. But if you're a public company, you definitely will have a board of directors. And usually this board of directors will be a select group of people, and they will elect the CEO to the company. And they are the ones who actually help with kind of general governance of strategy in terms of the company. More the day-to-day operations, usually the CEO is the one who does that. So that's the board of directors. Advisors are usually brought in more specifically, and typically for, like I mentioned, two things. So one is either an objective specific advisor. So I want to, let's say, looking for an advisor that can help you with raising, let's say, $2 million in funding. Maybe it's to help you with launching a new product line, whatever it is. So it's usually operational milestones that you tie them to, or maybe it's time-specific milestones. You might say, "Oh, I'm looking for a sales advisor for the first 2 years of the business," right? So that's usually the biggest difference between a board of director and advisor. Advisors are not legally held accountable to the business. They can give advice, but they know that, at the end of the day, you are the one executing on it, right? In terms of an advisor, so when you think of an advisor, I would say usually most advisors will stay around for about 1 to 2 years. And what I mean by that is if your company is growing at a good pace, usually you will hit your objectives within that 1 or 2 years, or you will move beyond the expertise of the advisor beyond the 1 to 2 years, because things will have changed too much. The landscape is different. Either it's a different scale, or maybe you have different product lines, or you're going after different target customers, and that advisor then becomes irrelevant. So then beyond that, you will actually have to usually, in some sense, terminate your advisor. So yep, you heard that right. If you have changed enough, then it makes sense, or if you've achieved the objective, then it makes sense to terminate that advisor. So when do you decide if you want to terminate? I've mentioned if you achieved or if you've changed enough. The other things is, if you find that the advisor is obviously a wrong fit, if your business has pivoted, if you're going after a new target market, you're launching new products, obviously. If you have been acquired, if you've restructured the company, maybe the advisor is no longer useful. So those are some other reasons why you might terminate the advisor. Other things to be mindful of. Generally, most advisors, I would say, if they are compensated, you typically want to compensate them in the form that they are most familiar with, not what you think they should get. So not every advisor will get stock options. A retail advisors, if you have, let's say, a restaurant business, if you have a product business, it's more common to pay advisors monetarily. So you might pay them by the hour in that sense. If you're a tech company, then it might be more common to give an advisor stock options. And if you're wondering how much stock options, I would say it's usually in the range of like 0.5 or 0.25 to the upper limit of 2.5. And that is not a lot. And that is actually the norm, because as you scale your company, that small amount can actually be worth a lot as well. So you don't want to be kind of setting aside too much capital or too much equity for your advisor. The 2.5 is usually someone who is like really notable. So like if you have, Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk as your advisor, then obviously they're going to be entitled to the much higher end, right? So if they're less involved, if they're less notable, then you want to justify a lower amount in terms of equity. So yep, that's kind of some of the general advice around finding a mentor and advisor. I hope that was helpful and valuable. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this episode.